Hello, I'm Chitra, faculty at Silver Hills Public School, Kozhikode. I'm here to discuss the poem Keeping Quiet by Pablo Neruda, which is the third poem in the text titled Flamingo. Now, since this is the third poem and we've already covered two poems, I would like to tell you, so just like the previous two poems, this poem also presents a very novel idea and it has a very good message for youngsters, especially class 12 students. As you're about to venture out into the world to be equipped with values that will help all of us create a better world. Now, you may feel that there is nothing extraordinary or novel about the title, Keeping Quiet. It's true. Like, for example, you can recall the countless instances where you've been asked to keep quiet, maybe by people at home, and especially by teachers in school. Have you ever wondered why you've always been asked to keep quiet, or at times at least been asked to keep quiet? Because there are benefits. And this is what the poet is also talking about, the benefits of keeping quiet. Now, the poet delves further into the theme, into the topic of keeping quiet, and so we have keywords associated with the poem: contemplation, introspection, and reflection. I would like to take the example of a classroom because all of us can relate, teacher and student can relate to the context of the classroom. Why have you been asked to keep quiet when the class is on? You're talking to your benchmate. What happens? You're losing an opportunity to study, to fetch better grades, and so on. So probably when you're talking, you're missing out on major areas that the teacher is explaining. This in the context of the classroom. What about the world? So for that, we'll have to look into the details that the text provides about the poet. The poet Pablo Neruda, I feel, needs no introduction. He belongs to Chile, one of the Latin American countries, so he writes in Spanish. And his words have been widely translated to all languages, especially English. He is a writer, a thinker, and maybe an activist. So what is expected of writers and thinkers? I believe writers and thinkers have a huge role to play, especially in mentoring common people like us. You can also recall the reformist movements and the writings of, say, people like Voltaire or Rousseau and the French Revolution and so on. So writers have a major role, have a huge responsibility. And Pablo Neruda seems to perfectly understand that huge responsibility. So in this poem, he advocates keeping quiet for world peace. That's what he suggests. If you keep quiet, there will be peace and harmony in this world. Under about the poet, the last sentence is very important. In this poem, he talks about the necessity of quiet introspection. I told you introspection or contemplation or reflection are keywords associated with the poem. When we are contemplating, we are looking inward. If I could borrow your modern day lingo or language, I could say me time, isn't it? Why do we need? There's a lot of discussion about me time. Why do we need that me time? To introspect, to look inward, and then come out as better human beings. And creating a feeling of mutual understanding among human beings. So once we have a better understanding of us, ourselves, we will have a better understanding of life around, people around, so that we can live a life in harmony with nature and also with fellow human beings. As always, for every chapter in Flamingo, there are, before you read, questions. First one, what does the title of the poem suggest to you? Title is very obvious, evident, the importance of keeping quiet, whether you're convinced or not at this stage. What do you think the poem is about? The poem is all about keeping quiet and what are the benefits that we can look forward to once we keep quiet. We've already discussed this question in the context of a classroom. Now let's move into the world and let's see what the poet has in store for us. The poem begins with the lines, now we will count to 12 and we will all keep still. So the poet has come up with something, with an idea. It almost sounds like a game. Yes, he wants all of us to keep quiet for any period of time. Now we, the poet is very much with us. He says we, all of us together, we will count to 12 and then we will all keep still. still. Now 12, why do you think the poet has used the number 12? Why couldn't he use 8 or 6 or 7? Now 12 is very important with regard to the measurement of time. 12 here is very, very important with regard to measuring time. Like for example, 12 hours plus 12 hours making up 24 hours of a day, the 12 months of a year, the numbers 1 to 12 on a clock. So you can understand how important the number 12 is when it comes to measuring time. So what does the poet suggest here? Counting up to 12. So counting up to 12, it might take 10, 12 seconds. If you're counting very fast, it could take minutes if you're counting in a slow manner, or it could even take hours. So it is up to you. What he suggests is for any length of time, for any period of time, let us observe this. That is, let's keep still. Keep still, just suspend all our activities. Just stop doing whatever you're doing and keep quiet. Keep quiet and keep still. Now this poem, I feel, again becomes very relevant in these times because we are undergoing a lockdown. Yes, we've all stopped our activities. For months, probably, there are people who stopped their activities. Now, keeping still again, till last year probably, I found it quite difficult to convince my students that we could actually keep still. But now with the pace of life slowing down, I can very well explain how it is when the world comes to a standstill. Just like in the post-COVID-19 days or post-corona days, when the world has actually come to a standstill. Now, Pablo Neruda wrote these poems decades before this present 2020. Here he envisages a world that comes to a standstill to contemplate and come back with better ideas to pursue a better life. So he wants all of us to count to 12 and keep still. Then what will happen if we were to do that? It would be an exotic moment. Exotic is extraordinary, unique, a very, very special moment. Without rush and engines, we would all be together in a sudden strangeness. For once on the face of the earth, let's not speak in any language. So when this activity is on, we are all quiet, we've suspended all our activities. For once, for the first time on the face of the earth, we will not be speaking any language, we'll be united in silence. So language here can be considered as a divisive force, people speaking different languages. So we can say that when we don't speak any particular language, when is that? When all of us are silent, we're not speaking any language. So we forget our divisions. Language is no longer dividing us. It's no longer a barrier. We are together, united in silence. For once. Why for once? Because it's happening for the first time in the history of mankind. Human beings are together, united in silence. Let's stop for 1 second, whatever we are doing. This again, I believe we couldn't imagine that we could actually stop, which we could actually slow down our pace of life. Before lockdown, it was something that we could not even imagine. But now it has become quite real. It's right there in front of us. So let's stop for at least 1 second, the poet says, and not move our arms so much. Let's not move our arms. First of all, he's told us to stop all our activities. And what about activities and arms? What's the relation between activities and arms? We use our arms. Arms here are hands, our limbs, for almost everything, all kinds of activities. There are any number of destructive activities also that we engage in with our arms. Yes, large-scale destruction like wars, shooting down enemies, using explosives on neighbors, enemies, and so on. People whom we label, whom we term enemies. In our day-to-day life also, do we always use our arms for very, very constructive purposes? No, not always. We use our arms to fight, to point fingers at someone, to demand, to seek, to hit, to beat, to kill, isn't it? So arms, let's not move our arms at all, because much of the things, much of the activities that our arms do can be destructive, can be termed destructive. So much about this stanza. The poet talks about a world which has come to a standstill. Now, although I was trying to relate this to or make it more relatable, talking about the world at present, we have to see that the world has come to a standstill because of a virus. So we are not talking about that. We are talking about something very, very productive. If voluntarily all of us could stop all our activities and keep quiet and contemplate, let's see what will happen. Now, going to the poetic devices in this poem, face of the earth, as you can see, the poetic device used in that line is personification, face, because the word face is used, face of the earth is personification, and arms here you can see is pun. Pun, as you know, is a play of words wherein the same word can have two meanings in a given context. So what about the second meaning? We've already discussed arms as in hands, yes? He's asking us to stop moving our arms, stop all our activities. So what would be the second meaning of arms? Arms can also stand for weapons. So this could be an open plea, since Pablo Neruda is a renowned poet and an activist. This could be an open plea to world leaders to stop moving their weapons. This again is very, very relatable because we have tension in our borders. Now, what about this moment? What will happen in this moment? What kind of a moment is that when the whole world is exercising silence and when the whole world has suspended all activities? It would be an exotic moment. Obviously, it would be a very special moment when we are all united in silence. This would be something like the Earth Hour that we observe usually on World Earth Day, when people all over the world switch off their lights. Why? To remind each other to conserve those resources. So something like that, an exotic moment when the whole world is silent, without Russian engines. Now what about Russian engines? Russian engines, I must say, are images, typical characteristic images of the modern world, symbols of the modern world. We cannot imagine a world without rush or engines. So when did this all start? It all started probably with the Industrial Revolution and how the world has seen progress in leaps and bounds. But the poet seems to say that everything comes with a price. So it is time to stop and ponder, to contemplate, to reflect. So when the whole world is silent, you can see that there is no rush, no sound of engines. Russian engines, symbols of prosperity, yes, but again we pay a price for that. What kind of price? Pollution, starting with pollution and probably ending with ozone layer depletion. That is the price we pay for progress thanks to rush and engines. We would all be together in a sudden strangeness. That's most important. We would all be together. We'll forget our differences. We are all speaking the same language. Which language is that? The language of silence. We are all united in this mission, even if it is for a few moments. Together in a sudden strangeness. Now, sudden strangeness is very, very suggestive. What does it suggest? You have to explain both sudden and strange. Sudden because till that point of time, the world is on the move. The world is into all kinds of activities, almost frenzied, mad rush. Yes, you talk about a rat race, a mad rush, and so on, talking about the world and its people. So sudden. So this moment is very, very sudden. Why? Because till that particular moment, the world is on the move, filled, people engaged in all kinds of activities. And strange. Why is it strange? Because it's happening for the first time in the history of mankind. So this is an exotic moment, sudden and strange. Sudden, why? As if you've pressed the pause button, isn't it? Pause, and the world has stopped. And strange because it's very, very novel. It's very new to us. We haven't experienced it earlier. So it's somewhat similar to a lockdown blues, isn't it? We've never experienced this kind of lockdown, life coming to a halt earlier. This is expected when the whole world comes to a halt or comes to a standstill. Why? To contemplate, to look inward. What kind of a world would that be? Now, here, as you can see, the poet has used two metaphors to talk about a world that is silent, a world that has suspended all activities, all activities. Two metaphors. The first one, fishermen in the cold sea would not harm whales. Why wouldn't the fishermen in the cold sea harm whales? Because they are also part of this activity. They have to be silent. They have to stop all their activities. What would they do otherwise? They would be killing, hunting whales. Whales, as we know, are endangered species, but still we continue to hunt them. Why? For profit. So what drives this world? It is profit that drives this world. But when this activity is on, something good happens. What happens? Fishermen, suddenly they realize that what they have been doing is wrong, and they come to a halt and they would stop this activity, this destructive activity of killing whales. Now, what about the cold sea? What can the cold sea stand for? Now, cold sea is very, very uninviting sea, uninviting, rough, hostile sea. In spite of that, the fisherman is out there to kill the whales. Why? Because he is greedy. He is out there for profit. So this is what drives mankind, the poet seems to say. Profit-oriented endeavors. That is what we engage in usually. So the first good thing that will happen as a result of this activity is the fishermen who realize that what they've been doing was wrong, who realize their folly and decide not to hunt whales anymore. Cold sea is important because cold sea refers to hostile sea. In spite of the hostile nature of the sea, the fisherman is out there braving the elements, the bad weather. So this is a metaphor for man destroying nature. How man destroys nature. Why does he do that? Why are we engaged in destroying nature? For our personal benefit, for our selfish interest. It could range from deforestation to burning of plastic, or to again back to ozone layer depletion, or receding of Arctic and Antarctic glaciers, global warming. Any activity that we engage in, we can see that it ends up in destroying nature. The second one, man gathering salt. The man gathering salt would finally look at his hurt hands. What about the man gathering salt? It can be observed when we look around that people are engaged in all kinds of activities, but then this again comes with a price. What is the price? They ruin their whole personality, their whole self in this mad rush to get hold of things. The man gathering salt will here stand for man amassing wealth, hoarding, storing wealth. We actually spend a lifetime, isn't it? We spend a lifetime hoarding and storing and amassing wealth, collecting things. Almost all of us lead very, very materialistic lives, yes? And the major motive in life is to get things, to possess things. But what happens? What is the price we pay? We forget what the purpose of life is. We forget to see, or we fail to see the beauty of life. So the man gathering salt, he is engaged in any work, and the end result, or what is his priority there? To gain something, money or some material possession. But here what has happened? When the whole world is silent, what does he do? He looks at his hurt hands. How is it that his hands are hurt? Because earlier he was oblivious to what he was doing to himself, or to herself for that matter. Because his only aim was to get ahead of the other person in this very, very competitive world. So that is what he'd been engaged in. He couldn't afford to stop, to pause and look at himself. But now what has happened? he's got time because the whole world is silent. So he now has time to look inward and see what he's doing to himself. He's ruined himself. He realizes his hands. That's what he has realized. So the second metaphor here is about man destroying himself. The first metaphor standing for man destroying nature, and the second one, man destroying himself in his mad pursuit of wealth and material possessions. Both these activities, destructive, should come to an end. The poetic device being alliteration in hurt hands. Moving on, what more benefits can come out of this activity? What more are we expecting? Already we have seen that we could be able to live a better life, lived in harmony with nature, because the fishermen have stopped killing whales. Similarly, people all over the world engaged in destroying nature would stop doing that. So, nature would be saved from the clutches of mankind. Second, man gathering salt, man amassing wealth, man in his mad frenzy to make more money, he would also stop and he would realize that there is a greater purpose in life. Thirdly, the poet talks about war. Those who prepare green wars, wars with gas, wars with fire. Here we can see that the poet traces the course of evolution of modern warfare. How we have progressed with regard to more potent weapons. How we have devised, we have made, manufactured more potent weapons. So what could these potent weapons do? The only thing they do is kill people in large numbers. So how does the poet do that? The course of evolution of warfare, starting with green wars. What about green wars? Wars fought in ancient times, wars fought for land, for territory. How kings in those times would conquer kingdoms, other kingdoms, and then annex the land or the territory. So it is believed that Alexander the Great had a kingdom starting at probably Egypt and ending here in Asia or in India probably. So for land, green wars initially fought for territory. As time passed, with the passage of time, we fought with gas. Now gas can only stand for one thing, gas chambers used in Germany for the killing of the Jews. So it's believed that almost 6 million Jews were slaughtered in these gas chambers. And moving on, wars with fire. That's what we use now. People use explosives to kill now. Talking about bomb explosions and other terrorist activities prevalent all over the globe. More potent weapons like that could be controlled from somewhere else and so on. Explosives, wars with fire. So we have progressed, we have devised new methods of killing our enemies. But are they really enemies? No, we will realize that they are not enemies, but they are our brothers when this activity is on. When two people are fighting with each other, suddenly there is silence, there is suspension of activities. So you're giving them, both of them, a chance to contemplate, to look inward and find out whether what they are doing is right. So after all these wars, what is the result? It's a futile activity because it's victory with no survivors. So warfare is a very futile, meaningless activity, the poet seems to say, because finally there is no one to celebrate the victory. It's victory with no survivors. Victory with no survivors is a very ironical line, because by the time you finish the war and you're ready to celebrate, you realize that there's no one around. Everyone is dead. There's no one around to celebrate the victory. So war itself is futile. It's meaningless. Now what about these people engaged in warfare? When this activity suggested by the poet is on, that is suspending all activities and keeping quiet. When this is on, what will happen to people fighting wars? Obviously, they will have to stop. They will stop, they will contemplate, and what will they realize? That this person whom they were fighting was not an enemy at all, he was actually a brother. So this realization dawns on him, and then he is ready to accept his opponent, his enemy, as his own brother, his fellow being, fellow human being. This is what happens when this activity is on with regard to people fighting war. What would they do? Those who prepare these wars, they would put on clean clothes and walk about with their brothers in the shade doing nothing. So now they're doing nothing. Earlier they were engaged in killing, wars, but now they are not doing anything. Instead, they are hugging each other. They are walking in the shade. So there are very suggestive terms here, like for example, clean clothes. Clean clothes is a metaphor. Literally, what can clean clothes stand for here? In this context, clean clothes would stand for clean. Earlier, they were using blood-stained clothes. They were wearing blood-stained clothes. But now they are wearing clean clothes. Why? Because there is no enmity again. How does it become a metaphor? This clean cloth can also stand for fresh ideas, new attitudes. Now their attitude has changed like anything. So it is embracing new ideas. And which is this new idea? The new idea centered around friendship, amity, peace, tolerance. So they have shed their earlier clothes. Literally, they've shed their blood-stained clothes. Figuratively, they've shed their old ideas of enmity and they've embraced new ones. The new ideas and walking about with their brothers in the shade. Who are these brothers? These people who were earlier enemies, now they are brothers. And the shade, the word shade here again is very important. Shade as in shade of a tree. What does the shade of a tree do? It provides protection to us. Similarly, this shade is the shade of brotherhood. Shade of universal brotherhood wherein people all over the world can be considered our brothers. Universal brotherhood, amity, tolerance, and so on. Friendship. Peace. The shade stands for peace. There will be peace at last. This again is very, very relatable because even now war is raging in many parts of the world, isn't it? And there are many war-ravaged places. For years, war has been raging in many countries. So any number of examples about tragedy related to war, how children are orphaned, how people lose everything, their life, property, everything, their dear and near ones thanks to this war, and how futile it is. So this part of the poem, this stanza of the poem serves as an eye-opener to all kinds of people who believe that there are enemies around. Actually, there aren't any enemies around. We all belong to this human race and we should have that understanding. When do we have that understanding, that realization? Only if we look inward, contemplate, then do we realize that we are all united. We should all be united. So this stanza also advocates world peace. The poet is all for world peace. Moving on. At this point, the poet seems to kind of gauge, to measure the clarity of thoughts in the reader's minds. What about the reader? Is the reader able to understand what he is trying to say? Has the reader comprehended fully what the poet is trying to say? So he is just trying to reiterate what he has already told. what I want should not be confused with total inactivity. So the poet is kind of trying to infer, trying to guess what is going on in the reader's mind. So he says, what I want should not be confused with total inactivity. Is the reader confused? He wants to know. Are you confused? Let me tell you, don't be confused. I am not talking about total inactivity. I am talking about life within. Although physically you are inactive, that's what he wants. For a few moments, for a few seconds, or even a few hours, be inactive, stop doing all your work and think. So it's not being total inactive, you are thinking. So there is life within, a lot of life within. Your mind is probably teeming with ideas. That's what he wants. So what I want should not be confused with total inactivity. I am talking about life. Life is what it is about. So since he mentions total inactivity, he is referring to death. I want no truck with death, he says. I want no truck with death. I do not want to have anything to do with death. Why do you think he's introduced the theme of death here? Total inactivity, silence is usually associated with death. In death, there is total inactivity. You're still in death and also you're silent. But he is not talking about the stillness of death or the silence of death. He is talking about life. So here again, he reiterates the fact, or he reaffirms the fact that he is talking about life and not at all about death. I want no truck with death. He does not want to have anything to do with death. He is not discussing death at all, because after death there is only decay. He is not thinking about that. He is thinking about contemplation. You can contemplate only if you are silent. You can contemplate only if you stop doing all your activities, if you stop doing all of whatever work you are doing. Then only you can contemplate. And that is what the poet advocates. To introspect, to look inward, think, and then be a better version of yourself. That's what he wants. So again, life is what it is about. What I am trying to say is about life. What about life? To enhance the quality of life, to make your life better. That is what I am trying to say. I am not talking about death, the poet reaffirms. And then he brings us to the sadness associated with our lives. He introduces the topic of sadness and he says, when you're contemplating, you realize how sad your lives are, or how sad our lives are. If we were not so single-minded about keeping our lives moving and for once could do nothing, perhaps a huge silence might interrupt this sadness. In this stanza, he talks about this huge silence that will happen once the whole world comes to a standstill. It will be silence. What kind of a silence? It's a huge silence. Billions of people all over the world have stopped all their activities and they've become silent, so it's a huge silence. So he says, if we were not so single-minded about keeping our lives moving and for once could do nothing. Usually, what is the way of the world? The world is always on the move, full of activities, hustle and bustle, machines and engines, rush and traffic, manufacturing, industries, so many things happening at the same time. So the world is always on the move. And what kind of movement is that? Single-mindedly about keeping our lives moving. Single-minded as if you have blinkers, yes? Single-mindedly, you're looking only at your aim, at your ambition, at your goal, which is almost always a very, very selfish goal. So if things could change, if we could think about people, others, nature, then the world would be a better place. If we were not so single-minded, determined about keeping our lives moving, Our lives, our own lives, selfish, self-centered motives. We are not looking here or there. We are only looking into our own lives to make our life better. And for once could do nothing. Suppose we could stop all that, yes, could do nothing. Then perhaps this huge silence would interrupt the sadness of never understanding ourselves and threatening ourselves with death. So suppose we stopped, and that's what the poet wants. Let's all stop. Let's stop all activities. Let's be silent. Then what will happen? In that huge silence, we realize how sad our lives are, the sadness associated with our lives. This is a very important point discussed by the poet, projected by the poet towards the end of the poem, the sadness associated with our lives. What makes our lives sad? So you may disagree with me, you may say that life is good, life is not sad, life is happy. But we have to understand this happiness is very, very superficial. It's very flimsy. It's a very thin veneer, and inside there is only sadness. And what kind of sadness? Sadness of never understanding ourselves and threatening ourselves with death. Now, how do we manage to do that? Never understanding ourselves, never understanding where we are headed. We don't even know, we don't even bother about asking questions about the larger picture of life. The purpose of life, it is lost to most of us. We believe that probably having a good life involves just making a lot of money or having many possessions. But no, there is more to life. That's what the poet wants to say, wants us to understand. Never understanding ourselves. So never understanding ourselves, talking about how there is very poor self-awareness. We do not know who we are or where we are headed in the first place. We are not able to take in the larger picture. And secondly, threatening ourselves with death. Now, how do we do that? How do we threaten ourselves with death? Through our any number of destructive activities. Earlier we discussed a few activities that we engage in, all destructive in nature, like any number of day-to-day activities, like say burning of excess, burning of fossil fuels, burning of plastic, enmity, hatred, selfishness, greed. Yes, these emotions, life centered around these emotions, or probably at the other end of the scale, larger ones like destruction to nature, deforestation, war, terrorism, and so on. With these mindless, reckless activities, what are we actually doing? We are bringing us closer and closer to the brink of extinction. It's only a matter of time before the human race will totally be wiped off the surface of the earth if these activities continue at this pace. That's what the poet says, or that's the poet's observation. So we are bringing us closer to death through our own activities, threatening ourselves with death. How? Through our own activities, all kinds of destructive activities that are detrimental to us and also to nature around us. So sadness again, sadness associated with our lives. The poet wishes to say that there is sadness associated with our lives. Usually, if we are made aware of the sadness, we tend to overlook it, we tend to ignore it. But when there is a huge silence, and so we can listen to the music of sadness, we can listen to the sad note. Once we start listening to our conscience, we realize that the note is sad. The notes presented by our conscience is sad. The note, it's a sad note. Threatening ourselves with death and not understanding ourselves. These are the two things that we have to improve. We have to mend our ways. Yes, see to it that our activities do not threaten us or nature. So we still have time to improve, the poet seems to say. We've almost reached the end of the poem. He takes a leaf out of the lesson provided by the earth, the lessons provided by our Mother Earth, our planet Earth. Perhaps the earth can teach us, the poet says, perhaps the earth can teach us when everything seems dead but later proves to be alive. That's what the earth teaches us. So the earth has many lessons for us, but again, in our mad pursuit of other things we consider important, we fail to hear, we fail to see what nature is trying to tell us. So here the poet says the earth can teach us many lessons, and here he presents one. Now, what kind of lesson is that? When everything seems dead and later proves to be alive. Obviously, he's talking about the season winter. He's talking about winter season when everything seems dead in ice, in snow, ice, barren ice, which cannot support any kind of vegetation. Okay? So for a period of time, the earth hibernates. The earth has gone to sleep. The earth hibernates. But what is actually happening inside? Inside, it's throbbing with activities. It's preserving the seeds for the next season, preserving the seeds and preserving life for the next season. But the earth takes time off. The earth contemplates. That is why after winter in the cycle of seasons, it's spring, yes. Spring, the season of color and gaiety, the most beautiful season, spring, a very promising, rewarding time. Only because the earth could hibernate, could take time off to contemplate, the earth can bounce back to life with added vigor, with added color in the season spring. So spring, the beautiful season spring is presented to us only because the earth could hibernate, only because winter was there. The earth could take time off to contemplate. So such is the beauty of spring. The earth was white, the earth was barren, the earth was silent, the earth was contemplating in winter. That could be the first suggestion put forward by the poet. Secondly, what more can the earth teach us? We can say that the earth supports life in a major way. Now, major I think is a small word to describe how earth supports life or sustains life. So what can this major stand for? In a major way, involving the life processes of millions of organisms. The earth, our planet, supports life in a major way, which involves the life processes of starting with birth. So the whole gamut of life or the whole activities involved in life with regard to millions of organisms supported by Mother Earth. But at the same time, the earth remains so passive, static, so calm and peaceful. Now we can say that whatever ruckus is found on the surface of the earth, it's man-made, yes? So in spite of having throbbing with a lot of activities, this is apparently hid. So the earth apparently hides these tremendous activities and then appears to be very, very inactive, calm and serene. So these are the two lessons that the earth teaches us. In this context, the poet seems to say. The first one is about the winter season, how the earth remains calm, how the earth contemplates in winter. Why? So that it can bounce back to life with all its vigor, gaiety and color in the season spring. So spring is very beautiful because during winter the earth was contemplating. So it's very important that we contemplate, that we introspect. What can happen? What is the benefit of introspection? We can come out with better ideas and we can make our lives better. As I told you earlier, we can create better versions of ourselves only if we contemplate. And to the last part of the poem, and now I will count up to 12 and you keep quiet and I will go. The poet has delivered his message. What is the message? If all of us could be still, could be silent, even if it is for a few moments, a few seconds, the time it takes to count 12, then there could be a huge benefit. We could all benefit out of this. Mankind, humankind could benefit out of contemplation only. So now I will count up to 12. The poet has already adopted it. The poet is willing, ready to follow this. And you keep quiet and I will go. He is asking us to participate. You keep quiet. And he exits. He makes it his exit. Why? Because hereafter his presence will be a hindrance to us because we are engaged in contemplation. Hereafter his presence will be a hindrance to us. We do not want him anymore because we are into contemplation. We are about to contemplate. The poet has delivered his message and he quickly departs so that we can contemplate what he has just told us. Now the think it out exercise is being discussed here. The first question in the text is, what will counting up to 12 and keeping still help us achieve? So the poem is all about contemplation, the need to contemplate and to introspect, to make our lives better, to live a life in harmony with fellow human beings and with nature. The important word I told you here is 12. What about 12? It refers to any length of time, any period of time, any span of time. So counting up to 12 can help us contemplate, to introspect. On what? On life so far, life led so far, so that we can be better equipped to live a life, the life ahead, a better life ahead, a fruitful life ahead. 12 here standing for, again, any length of time, the time it takes to count up to 12. At least a few seconds. That's what the poet exhorts. He just wants us to contemplate at least for a few seconds and notice the changes. Second, do you think the poet advocates total inactivity and death? No. Very clearly the poet has told us. In between, the poet had tried to infer, to measure or to gauge the clarity of thoughts in the reader's minds. So that is when he's told us, I want no truck with death, no connection with death. I'm not talking about death. It is evident that he is thinking, probably the reader is confused, he's been talking about inactivity, about silence. Could it be the inactivity and silence associated with death? No. He almost categorically he states, no, I'm not talking about death. Life is what it is about. I'm talking about life, how to improve the quality of life through introspection. The third question, what is the sadness that the poet refers to in the poem? The sadness of never understanding ourselves and threatening ourselves through our own destructive activities. This also we had discussed in detail. How is it that we have very poor understanding of ourselves, very poor self-awareness? Because we are living in a fast-paced world, bombarded with distractions. That is why it is imperative, it is very important that we take some time off. You talk about soul searching, isn't it? Soul searching. You take some time off to look inward, contemplate, so that again you can be a better you. So never understanding ourselves in this world, we never understand ourselves. We do not understand the larger picture of life. We do not understand the purpose of life. Why again? Because we are like single-mindedly pursuing our goals. And what kind of goals? Profit-oriented, self-centered goals. So only if we can introspect can we bring about a change here. Second, threatening ourselves with death through our activities. What kind of activities? That also we had discussed in details. What kind of activities? Like day-to-day activities, ranging from day-to-day activities like say burning of plastic to other destructive activities like war and terrorism at the other end of the spectrum. So almost all kinds of activities that we engage in are destructive in nature. So slowly, what are we actually doing? Through these mindless activities, through these reckless activities, we are bringing us closer to the brink of extinction. Yes? So it's only a matter of time, the poet seems to say. If we continue in this vein, what will happen? The human race will be wiped off this face. So he is warning us, he is giving us warning well in advance. The poet wishes that this huge silence would help man realize the futility of his actions, futility of actions like war that we discussed earlier, how futile war is. He wants us to have better understanding about ourselves and also the world we live in. So he wants us to live a harmonious life. And to the last question, that's question number 4. What symbol from nature does the poet invoke to say that there can be life under apparent stillness? So he says the earth can teach us many lessons. The one that he's borrowed here is about the season winter. How in winter, how everything appears dead, silent, but the earth is actually contemplating. What's the earth actually doing? The earth is preserving the seeds for the next season. So only because during winter, the earth is hibernating, is inactive, what happens in the next season? The next season is filled with color and gaiety, the next season being spring. So the earth will bounce back to life in spring, or spring is so beautiful because earth experienced winter. The earth had experienced winter, the earth was contemplating in winter. That is why the earth is able to present such a beautiful season as spring. So the quality of our lives will be increased like spring. It will be like spring all over once we decide to contemplate, to think. Secondly, the earth also teaches us how it preserves, how it supports life in a major way. The life processes of millions of organisms all monitored by the earth. But at the same time, the earth remains calm and serene. So this is the second lesson that the earth teaches us. How you can lead a full life, at the same time you can remain serene. There is no need to engage in this mad rush for material possessions. The earth also hibernates in winter, which is akin to contemplation, which enables the earth to present the most beautiful season for us, that is spring. So these are the 4 questions that you have under Think It Out, the Think It Out questions. The 4 questions are very important from the exam point of view. These are short answer questions. So summing up, I told you in the beginning of the class, I told you keeping quiet has a very powerful message, a very novel, innovative idea presented before you, especially class 12 students, as you are getting equipped to face the world, to venture out into the world outside. Yes, these are certain things that you can take with you to make this world a better place. After all, again, it is up to you, the future generations, the future citizens of the world. So if you want to be better citizens and if you want the world to be a better place, you have to live a life in harmony, lived in harmony with fellow human beings and also with nature. This is what the poet advocates in the poem Keeping Quiet. I hope now all of you are convinced of the importance of keeping quiet. And how will keeping quiet help us? Keeping quiet, apart from the literal aspect of just keeping quiet and contemplating, or keeping quiet and introspecting, will help us lead better lives, lead colorful lives like the season spring. Thank you so much.